Welcome to Conservative Solutions for Our Common Challenges. I'm Dan Albas, the Member of Parliament for Okanagan Lake West, South Kelowna, in the beautiful interior of British Columbia. This podcast is all about the people putting in the hard work to make our country work. They don't seek the spotlight. They're not trying to change the headlines. They're trying to change their communities. They're trying to change our country. These conversations inspire me, and I hope they'll inspire you as well. Today, I'm joined by someone who brings deep personal and professional experience and a clear commitment on how we manage forests, not just how we fight fires. Murray Wilson is a retired forester with decades in wildfire suppression and forestry management, and the producer of the documentary BC is Burning, a film focused on practical ways to reduce wildfire risk and protect communities, something highly sought after in the Okanagan. We'll draw lessons from the recent wildfires seasons in the Okanagan, such as the 2023 McDougall Creek wildfire, and talk about what actually changes the outcome at the landscape scale. We'll look at how to move from suppression-heavy systems to a more measurable, results-based management. Murray, thank you for being here. It's great to have you on the podcast.
Glad to be here, Dan.
So how are things with you this week? I know you're an avid skier. Are you getting out into the field much, or mostly doing screenings and briefings? Do you get time to ski as well?
Well, I've got the odd days in skiing. It's been a different year this year, challenging, but lately we've had some good snow, so that's made it worthwhile. But yeah, I've done a lot of screenings for the film now. I've shown it to 12 communities around British Columbia and shown it at the BC legislature, at conferences. Thousands of people have seen it. It's been great.
So what's the usual response you get to it?
You know, I think one of the reasons that motivated me to make the film is I said, well, nothing's changing. I was tired of the smoke. I was tired of, instead of looking forward to summer, now this year we've got a low snowpack and we're worried that we're going to have a lot of fires. And I think that resonates with people. People are feeling concerned. They're nervous. They want solutions. So I think, people ask me questions. Does it have to be this way? Are there alternatives? What can we do? And they're frustrated, I would say, overall, that we're not making changes to correct the situation that we're in.
So as a forester, when people ask what causes all these fires, I'm sure they often think about ignition. But from a forester's point of view, could you break down the triangle for us? Ignitions, weather, and I believe it's fuels or structure, and where management really, those choices really matter.
I think an easy way to think of fire is a triangle, and it needs three things to make fire take place. And you think of a hot summer, heat. We can't do a lot about heat, so the fires need heat. They also need oxygen. If we get a windy day or something like that, that's tough for us to control. But the one thing that we can control, the other part of the fire triangle, is fuel. And that's really what the film focuses on. We can't do a lot about heat, we can't do a lot about oxygen, but we can do something about fuel, which is trees for the most part.
So the 2023 fire season right across the country set a national record for the amount of areas burned, an indicator that the old operating model isn't keeping up. What's changed in our forests and in the way we manage them that makes today's fires so different from the ones you started your career with?
Well, 2023 was an exceptional year, if you want to use that term. With over 15 million hectares burnt in Canada, over 2.8 million hectares burnt in British Columbia. And what is a hectare? A hectare is about the size of a Canadian football field. So just to give you an idea. So that's how many we burnt. Canada that year, according to the European Space Commission, Copernicus emitted 23% of the world's wildfire emissions, CO2 into the air. Staggering amount. So certainly, when we look at it from a worldwide perspective, not only did it impact Canada, but we impacted the world with our carbon emissions, CO2 emissions.
Well, and all the particulate in the air too. I think as Okanagan residents, you have a lot of children, a lot of seniors, that those kinds of conditions could be very hard on them.
And there's more and more evidence coming out to support that from the medical side. There's links to premature death with people with respiratory issues. There's ties to dementia now. More and more medical health impacts are coming out from wildfire smoke.
So give us your straight assessment of the current forestry wildfire model in British Columbia, and if you can, across much of Canada. Where does it deliver, Murray, and where does it come up short?
Well, I think we've always been very strong on emergency management. I mean, we have very dedicated. We have a great fleet of aircraft, helicopters. We have very dedicated fire suppression people, and I think we're improving on technology to detect that earlier. If you think of like a home right now, some of the technology there sprinklers, all those types of things, we're integrating more and more of that into our forests. So we're very good at going after trying to suppress the fires. We put funding into it. We want to put it out. We claim victory when we get the fires out. But where we're lacking in my mind is before the fires start, reducing the risk so we don't have to fight the fires. And so prevention versus suppression. We're always going to need to suppress the fires. That's a good thing to do. We don't want to impact communities. But if we focus more on the prevention side, which isn't as glamorous because the other one gets emergency funding, this one needs continuous funding.
So when you say, in terms of removing the fuel, so what are some common methods you would do for that, and who is best positioned to pay for that?
Well, essentially, fuel is trees are vertical, and as they get old and they die, and then they create a more significant hazard. And we have lots of different forest types in British Columbia. Some of them have thick bark, like around Kelowna. We have ponderosa pine and Douglas fir. They have a root that goes down, so if you thin those trees out, give them more space, they'll stand up in the wind. If you get higher up into the plateaus, or if you're skiing at Big White, if you thin those trees, they'll blow down. And they have thin bark, and they don't survive the fire. So what we need to do overall is we need to treat the forest type that's there, make a certain treatment for whatever's appropriate for it, and basically reduce the amount of fuel. So in areas that you can thin, less trees. In areas on the landscape, we need to thin the landscape. So we need to create a mosaic around the landscape, create openings in the landscape so the fire doesn't have a continuous path to run. So it'll be broken up on the landscape. So around communities, you can remove the fuel, make it so it won't climb up into the trees and burn farther. On the landscape, you have to do the same thing, but at a much larger scale.
So looking at the McDougall Creek fire, what did that fire reveal about how fuels, forest structure, and wind and embers interact at the edge of communities, even across Okanagan Lake? And what did we learn that we should be changing here in our region?
Well, I think for people that lived in McDougall Creek, it was a terrifying experience. And over the years, there had been a bunch of thinning and pruning of trees in that area, so it wasn't like it wasn't proactive. But I think the real lesson came forward for folks is that the fire risk isn't just inside the subdivision risk. It really is the area outside of that, the large area that we need to treat. And I think people had done good things, fire smarting their homes and things like that. But once these fires get big, it's really, really difficult to control them. And, flames didn't go across Okanagan Lake, embers did. 3.8 kilometers across the lake. And there was some very proactive in the Wilden development in Kelowna had thinned out on their own, thinned out a lot of the trees and probably saved that development. So I think the scale and how far the fire creates its own weather, that's uncertain for people, and it really shows that you need to treat the landscape.
So how do we integrate this model? Is there a jurisdiction that you think that gets this right?
Well, the challenge in Canada, of course, is that we have a lot of forests. We have over 300 billion trees, and we have a very small population. There's a jurisdiction that really gets it right, and that's basically Scandinavia and Finland in particular. Finland has 15 million hectares of forests. We have close to 60 million. They're harvesting right now double the volume that we are. They do a couple of thinnings. They do a final regeneration or clear-cut harvest at 50 to 100 years. In the last 10 years, they've had 5 years with no fires.
5 years with no fires.
And their average is under 500 hectares a year burnt.
So how do they get the balance between industry, community, as well as, I believe they use a lot of the waste wood that they get for different products like energy, not just for delivering wood?
Yes, they're using all of the forest products that come from the forest. So the debris, is going into bioenergy plants where they're heating and providing electricity for 70,000 person communities. Now, the challenge that we have with that is we're a much bigger country with lots of space, and they have generations and generations of harvesting their forests where we don't. The other thing that we have that they don't have is we have cheap electricity and cheap natural gas. So they're able to do that. But I think that the opportunity for us, there's various studies that show, for example, in 2023, we spent $1 billion on suppression in British Columbia. Studies show that the impacts are 20 to 30 times the suppression costs. So if you did a cost benefit and said, if we did these things, the benefit would be greatly exceed what we're paying.
Okay, so if we were to adopt some of that maintenance cycle where you're thinning, sometimes you're doing preemptive burns, you're also, logging where appropriate and restoring, like what kind of cycle would that be? What could we expect in a country as big as Canada? Or at least maybe we'll just start with British Columbia.
Well, we have a huge province, as you know, and right now our forests basically have three categories. We have, say, roughly 60 million hectares. It's a little bit less than that, but just for ease of math. About a third of that is called the timber harvesting land base, where we actually practice forest management. There's another third, which is protected areas, old growth management areas, parks, visuals, wildlife areas, and then another third, which is inaccessible or uneconomic. So right now, 2/3 of our forests we're basically leaving alone, and the other third is where we put all our energy about how we should manage. But so, the scale of Canada is staggering, but I think if we have targeted landscape approaches using the timber harvesting land base, we can reduce the scale of the fires. We're always going to have them, but we can knock them down when they're smaller.
Now, I should say, I'm not just beating up on the provincial government here, because obviously there's some very hard workers in BC wildfire, and they do tremendous work, especially when people or land, their properties are at risk. But if you look at Jasper National Park and what happened to the community of Jasper, that's under the federal jurisdiction. So we certainly can't say that there seems to be one doing better than the other.
Well, Jasper and Banff National Park, worldwide iconic parks that are known around the world. And probably 15 years ago, I think foresters started writing letters and saying, you've got a significant problem. You've got mountain pine beetle. It's a challenge with parks because we want to leave them natural, but nature impacts them in a way. But they did work with Canfor, forest products companies, for about a year and did a fair bit of harvesting right around the community. The challenge was it was one and done, and treatments don't work that way. You need to have a continuous plan to reduce wildfire risk. And a good example of that is Logan Lake, which is kind of the poster child for a fire smart community where they had over a decade of continuous treatments and saved their community.
Well, I know from Logan Lake, having formerly represented that area in previous parliaments, they actually have part of their community forest where they dedicate the cut that they get from that, and they put the money into their Fire Smart program. So there's that annual budget. I think one of the challenges for many of our municipalities is that they don't have a funding source other than general taxation.
Yeah, and I think that the opportunity for us is to look at it a different way. Often we break things into silos and say everything's got to stand on its own. But as I mentioned earlier, the suppression costs, which are emergency funding, we'll go and spend that money without even thinking twice about it because there's a problem. We need to put that emergency funding, some of that emergency, into the landscape. And if we do a true economic analysis on it, and like I mentioned, 20 to 30 times the impact of what the suppression costs are, you get there pretty quickly that it makes sense for us to do this on the landscape, provide jobs, provide a whole host of opportunities, reduce the risk around our water supply, all those types of things. So it just makes a lot of sense if we do some number expansion, if you will, some different arithmetic.
Well, particularly around the Okanagan, because, we're a tourism region. And before I got formally into public life, I wrote an op-ed about how the Garnet Mountain Fire and the Okanagan Mountain Fire burn areas seemed just to be abandoned for years after. And what that made the Okanagan look. And since then, we just have more cases of the same thing. So when you harvest as a logger, you basically have regulations that say you have to replace either 1 to 1 or sometimes as many as 1 to 4 trees for every one you take. But after a forest fire, there's no criteria for or requirement for planting because it's just considered to be an act of God. So do you think that there's, that we could be looking to replant some of these areas? What would you say as someone who's worked in this field?
Well, we have probably the most regulated forest sector in the world in British Columbia and probably the rest of Canada. That's not necessarily a good thing, but by law, if you harvest an area, you submit a plan that's signed and sealed by a professional forester that outlines what's going to happen on that land base for the next 20 years legally, and then the government takes it over after that. So yes, they're all reforested. We've planted over 4 billion trees by companies in this province, more than that. But after a wildfire takes place, essentially we plant some of them, but very, very few. Now, if it's a lower intensity burn, that was a natural process and those areas will grow back. Where the challenge is coming is we're having very heavy fuels and very intense fires. And you talk about fires like the Garnet Fire or the 2003 Okanagan Mountain Park Fire across the lake from us here, where big areas of it are still not growing back. That's the challenge. So not only did we release all that CO2 from the initial fire, we're not sequestering more carbon with the new forest coming back. So it's a double-edged sword.
Yeah, so if it's a natural low temperature fire, there's a greater chance to be able to get in there and replant. But if it's a high intensity fire, that just takes longer. Is that what you're saying?
Well, a natural process, some of our areas, especially lodgepole pine, they have what's called a serotinous cone, and it opens up in the heat, so it'll seed those areas back in naturally. And that's why we have these vast areas of lodgepole pine. This has been happening for thousands of years, that rotation. But now we're getting hotter fires and they're burning right down to the rock, so they're not growing back. And you can see that if you were in Kamloops driving up towards Barrier, you can see the McClure Fire, that really a lot of those areas are not growing back. So that's a challenge for us, and it's an opportunity that we should be planting some of these areas back for sure, because they store carbon and all those kinds of things.
Absolutely, absolutely. It also helps to not just restore the natural beauty, but also for the animals and creatures that live in that ecosystem. So let's talk reforms. If you just gave you a magic wand, if you could change 3 things in the next 12 months to shift from a more reaction to a more active role, what would they be, Murray?
Well, I think that community safety has to become more of a priority for us. And one of the challenges we have is we operate in a highly regulated environment in British Columbia and Canada overall. And we've already made the decisions that we want a certain level of harvesting on Crown land base. We already know that we want to keep communities safe, but it's taking us years to get permits for approvals that are prepared by professionals, and still takes years to. That needs to change. We need to go to, if it's submitted by these professionals following the rules and regulations, 30-day approval, done. Make it happen on the landscape instantaneously. We have people trying to make these things happen and they're just not taking place because of regulations. I think the funding mechanisms for treatments around communities and things like that needs to be looked at hard from a cost-benefit analysis. Don't make it stand on its own. But what you really need is a program that is sustained. Someone can actually build a business around it for the next 20 years. Like say for the next 20 years, we're going to commit to this kind of funding, not 1 year, not 2 years, not 5 years. That's what needs to happen to reduce risk around communities. And as a result of that, there'll be businesses built out of that on the bioenergy side and things like that. That will make a difference. If they know they've got certainty, that people will build that business. So that would be the third part of it.
Wow. Okay. Now, you've argued that the federal role should be to set the scoreboard while provinces manage forests. What 4 outcome metrics should Ottawa publish every year so Canadians can see real progress?
Well, in Canada, as probably people know, like in British Columbia, 94% of the landscape is Crown land, so the Crown or Indigenous people decide on what's going to happen on that land base. So the federal government has say in our parks, Jasper and Banff, but for the most part, the provinces manage the forests. I think the federal government has a significant role because smoke impacts all of us. Trade issues impact all of us, so the economic thing. So I think, things that the government can do is work with the provinces and set some targets. We want to see annual numbers on how much fuel reduction you're doing on the landscape, so on the landscape basis and around communities. Have two metrics for that. How much high risk areas, and our forests are risk rated in British Columbia. They have ratings on which 2/3 of our forests are rated as high to extreme risk of wildfire. Wow. So we know where to go. We can pick those areas. So I think the federal government could say, I want to see a metric around high risk communities. How much have you done? And then on the overall landscape, because we still need to deal with the landscape, there needs to be a metric there. Then I think there needs to be a look at CO2. It's one of our biggest issues that comes out of wildfires. So I think there needs to be some national targets on saying, including wildfires in our carbon emissions, and tracking that to say, how are we doing in reducing that? We have a responsibility, I think, for the world. If you think in 2023, if we were 23% of the world's wildfire emissions, we're making significant efforts to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions when we contribute less than 2% on a worldwide basis. But we're 23% in 1 year, so we certainly have an obligation there. And then 4, I think the last one is we need to make sure that we have sustained funding going forward for these programs. One and done is not going to do it. So I think the federal government can set a scorecard. Okay, if you're responding well to these things, we can help in funding these things if you're making progress. If you're not making progress, we're not going to help.
Yeah, well, again, we saw the 2 billion trees commitment where Trudeau just suddenly pulled that out of his hat in the 2019 election. No consultation. And people were telling me right away that this thing isn't going to happen because the federal government really didn't have a lot of expertise. And we saw now that the government has basically said, we're ending the program because it wasn't planned out, it wasn't coordinated. Now, speaking of coordination, at our last convention, and this is the Conservative Party of Canada, our grassroots members voted in favor of a policy put forward by the Riding Association of Calgary-Nose Hill. And I'll just read it here. The Conservative Party recognizes the devastating impact of forest fires across Canada. Conservatives will work with provinces and territories, industry, and Indigenous people to develop a framework for a national forest management strategy with the objective of mitigating the impacts of forest fires across Canada. So are you in agreement with that kind of policy? And what kind of things, and if so, what kind of things should we be looking to do or look out for?
Yeah, I really agree with that. Like I said earlier, that wildfires are not just a provincial issue, they're a national issue. They're impacting, we talked about greenhouse gas emissions, medical, they're impacting tourism across the country, economic viability. So yeah, I think it's great that they do that. It needs to be all hands on deck. We can't just ignore it. It's, just because it's a provincial issue, it's impacting all of us. So I'd love to see the federal, I don't think that we don't need more governance, but we need more metrics on things that tell people, let's get this stuff done. So, make sure that there's support to get some of the industries that we need that'll utilize this fire stock, that basically the bioenergy products and all those types of things. So help make that happen. Bring certainty to it. The Indigenous management of our forests is happening, needs to happen, but we need to work together to make sure that we're all going in the same direction. We can't have different directions. We all want the same thing. We want safer communities. We want lower fire risk in our forests. We're always going to have fires, but we want to make sure our communities are safe. So I think the federal government can do a lot of that. So they need to track, like I talked about earlier, track the fire risk around communities. Are the treatments happening? Those types of things.
Well, those are all very good things for us to look at. And I like how you're saying Ottawa can actually set a scorecard and try to see if they can work on rewarding good action, like real action on the areas we want. Now, I have a quick lightning round for you, Murray. So this is something we haven't done before. So one myth about wildfires and forest management you'd like to retire.
Doing nothing is environmentally neutral.
Okay. Can you explain that really quick?
So if we make a decision to do nothing, there are consequences to that. So so if you look at Jasper or Banff and we say we are going to do nothing, there is an impact from that. The fire risk increase, the town can burn down, all those types of things. So doing nothing is a decision. It's a decision to do nothing, but there's consequences from that.
One metric Canadians should see every year.
They should see that less area burned on areas we manage. Not the areas we don't manage, but if on the timber harvesting land base, on active forest management, they should see less area burned. Compare it to the areas that aren't.
One innovation you've seen that we should be doing in the Okanagan or British Columbia or just in Canada right now?
I think take a page from Finland and turn the wildfire risk into community value through bioenergy plants, local heating, those types of things. Take the products from the forest into the communities like they've done in Scandinavia and make it a community value. I showed the BC is burning in Clearwater last week, and they have a community heating system that derives products from the forest, slash and things like that, branches, tops, and converts it into heat for the community. I'd like to see more of that. We have forest communities. I grew up in the Northwest Territories and just south of the Arctic Circle. No roads, plane came once every 2 weeks. What a great opportunity up there to use something like bioenergy. Where they're flying diesel into these communities to heat them. You could use bioenergy from the forest and have a double-edged thing. You could reduce the fire risk, provide local jobs. It's just a win-win. I'd like to see more of it.
Murray, thank you for this conversation and for the years you've spent taking those hard lessons from the woods and making practical suggestions that work on the ground. These aren't abstract issues at all. They involve real impacts on our families, on our neighborhoods, and on our communities, like you said, that have to live with the smoke, the fear, and the loss. Your willingness to keep showing up, to explain what works, to build partnerships, and to turn that experience into action says a lot about who you are and why you've stayed in this work. And to everyone listening, thank you for spending this time with us. Policy only matters if it helps people. Behind every debate are Canadians who just want safer communities, healthier forests, and a future they can trust. And that's what Conservative Solutions for Our Common Challenges is about, shining a light on people who refuse to give up, who choose to lead, and who are quietly making things better, even when it's difficult. If today's conversation resonated with you, please share it with someone you know that might want to hear it. I'm Dan Albas. Thank you for listening. Thank you for caring. We'll see you next time.